They didn't do any good. Why? One of the reasons is there was no enforcement mechanism for the state. So tied into this, there's a basic privacy data collection law called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act that was passed in 1972, 1973. And it was implemented through regulations. In 2011, the administration, and then that law had a lot of loopholes. Nonetheless, in 2011, the administration essentially rewrote the statute by passing new regulations. It changed it from being a data protection statute to a data sharing statute. Now government can share your children's data, very personal data, with any other federal agency, any state agency, and with private entities, even private entities outside the jurisdiction of the United States. That was done in part to implement this redesign that Anne-Marie and Jamie were talking about.
So I wanted to just kind of touch on one thing. Has everybody heard of ACORN? Do you know that they're in our schools in New Hampshire? Okay. So they just cleaned up their act a little bit. Annenberg Foundation out of Brown University receives its funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the federal government. So what they do is, you know, we heard about bypassing the states and going directly into these entities. So they go into the schools. So Annenberg Foundation has what they call the Nellie Mae Foundation, Nellie Mae Grants. And so what Nellie Mae does is they come into your school, or in the case of New Hampshire, they came into New Hampshire and said, here's some money. And our Department of Education said, oh, good, let's take that money. But what you need to do is you need to look at what do you sell for that money. Nellie Mae is in the Pittsfield schools. They're just... Wonderful news, Sanborn is up for a $100,000 grant. With that grant comes strings attached, and the only way that you can look at those is to do a right to know request, which I have done in some of the schools in New Hampshire. And when you get that when you get those grant applications, you can see exactly what the school has to do to get this money. Now, if the money is originally coming from the federal government, and the money's come from Bill and Melinda Gates, who's controlling your school? It is not the school board. Because in that grant application, they are dictating how the teachers can teach in a classroom. Pedagogy, it's called pedagogy. So they're telling the teachers how they can teach. Now, some of these teaching methods, if you research the teaching methods, and you look inquiry-based, you might see something like that going on in your school. A lot of those teaching methods, if you research it and you look at studies on those kinds of teaching methods, actually lowers academic achievement. You can look at independent studies on this. So not only are they bringing in these grants to your schools and controlling your schools, and your superintendent's telling you, isn't this wonderful, we're getting all this money, they're actually bringing in, telling your teachers how to teach. That's how controlling this has become. Your grade cards, they are now being controlled by the federal government. The federal government, we're having grade cards changed all throughout New Hampshire, and parents are looking at these grade cards going, I don't like them, I don't like what I see. They have no idea where this is coming from. So you got to follow the money. You have to look at your school. Where's the money? Start asking for grants. One of the things you can do is have your school board members go through every grant application and look at it before signing off on a grant application. Have your school board set up a textbook committee. Get parents on that textbook committee. So when the parents are looking at textbooks and going, I can't figure this out, maybe it's not a good idea to adopt that textbook. Now, they don't want you to do this. They want no part of you doing this. But a lot of school board members that I talk to, these are the suggestions that I will give them. You know, set up a textbook committee. Look at the grant applications. Your superintendent's not going to want this. They are going to be dead set against it. But the school board is supposed to oversee your superintendent. They need to go back to that. So just kind of wanted to tell you a lot of what's going on. So our Department of Education is instilling a lot of reforms in our classroom because they've got the Nellie Mae money coming into the state and also into the schools, and we have the No Child Left Behind waiver that we also had to apply for, and you can look at that online, and you can look at what we had to give up to get the No Child Left Behind waiver. So that's how they're doing it. That's how they're getting into the schools, taking control. If you think you have control of your school, you simply do not. You simply do not. And so I'm trying to tell you how we're losing that control. Do you have anything else?
I guess I'd kind of like to wrap up by talking a little bit more about the standards. So I mentioned that Massachusetts has done historically well. There's a test called the NAEP test, which is the nation's report card. It's been around for about 40 years or so. Every state takes it every couple of years. And they have reading and they've got math. They have science and history too, but the main key ones for our conversation is reading and math. The reason why Massachusetts in the last 5 administrations of that test has been #1 in every grade tested and every category tested, and no state has ever done that before, was that the deep commitment to classic literature, poetry, and drama in reading. This is enormous, folks. It seems like it's not a big deal. You say, oh, what does it really matter if my kids are reading history or informational text or these things in English class? It matters first and foremost because the purpose of education is to educate our young people to be human. And when you read books like Huckleberry Finn and you read Sherlock Holmes and Edith Wharton and Dickens and all these timeless texts, not only is the vocabulary and the stories something that the kids like. Anyone who has children know how much they love stories, right? But they also bind us together as human beings. They teach us about friendship, they teach us about comedy, about tragedy, all the things that help make us human. And if you're shifting away from those kinds of not only proven, 100 years of reading research makes it clear that those kinds of stories are the kinds of stories that help kids build vocabulary so that they're able to get to the day where they can appreciate Shakespeare, or they're able to read the Federalist Papers because it's written in kind of more difficult 18th century language. That it matters in terms of the test, but it also matters in terms of the quality of these children's lives. It helps develop the kind of citizens that you want to have in your community, right? It teaches kids about the things that make us human. And so, there's a lot of details that you've heard about in the Common Core, and we'll continue to hear about the Common Core. But the way in which this sort of workforce development model, not only is it top-down, but my view of it is that it's fundamentally dehumanizing, too. Because children are not cogs in the machine. They're not human capital. They're not something to be sorted in databases at your State Department of Education or in the U.S. Department of Education, the Department of Labor, something to be sort of directed here and there by bureaucrats. They're children. They're an end in themselves. And the only way they're really going to be able to grasp the knowledge and vocabulary and history that's requisite to being a citizen is to read these kinds of texts. And when Common Core cuts it, it cuts something deep in kids that connects them to their families and to their communities. And I think that's why, in addition to the crazy math, which is really writing about math, not doing math, that as parents, and moms in particular, when Emmett and Anne-Marie and I have gone around the country, and we've been to 20-some-odd states or more, it's usually moms. 60-70% of the audience are moms, and they know that this math is crazy, but they know there's something wrong with it. They know there's something wrong with Common Core. It's why it's gone from inevitable to poisonous. That's what Jeb Bush, one of the biggest backers of Common Core, has called it, poisonous, right? That these things matter, and that's why I would strongly encourage you to continue to be active and get yourself educated on it, and make sure that your public official knows your displeasure with it. And you saw some presidential candidates, there's going to be more that are coming through your state. Let them know. Ask them questions. If they can't deliver answers, they're not the candidate for you. If they give you just the talking points, the 1 or 2 lines, push them. These are key decisions, maybe the most important. So that's my plea.
In my view, these presidential candidates have to be a lot more detailed about exactly how they're going to handle this situation. what are they going to do with the Department of Education? Fiorina was good today when she said that the federal government under her administration would have no role in mandating testing. But their hands need to be tied in a lot more ways as well. I think the conditional funding has to end. We have to make it easier for the federal government, for state governments and local governments to sue the federal government when there's overreach. And I think we have to make it clear that a state can pull out of a federal grant at any time it wants without having to pay back money. That was one of the recurring themes that we heard across the country from state legislators. What if we pull out of this federal grant or that federal grant? Is the federal government going to come after us? So these are things that these candidates have to spell out in much more detail.
I just, because I'm in New Hampshire and you guys are all in New Hampshire, I need your help. I really need your help. This, and here's the funny thing is my kids are not in the public schools. I've been doing this, and my kids have never had, well, I shouldn't say that. I think my son had a Common Core book in a private school once. But, I'm doing this because I just feel like it's the right thing to do. But I need help. So, when you see Congressman Ginta walk into the room, tell him we don't want No Child Left Behind reauthorized, things like that. Tell your state senators, tell your state representatives. The problem a lot of times is they want to fix something with something even worse. I mean, we almost had that happen in the last legislative session. They almost took out the Smarter Balanced Test and put something worse in by Republicans in our state. And we had to fight that. We had to fight Republicans. And that's what makes it even worse. So, I'm doing what I can do. We have a couple, I have a couple of school board members in here who are awesome. Get good school board members elected. Get behind them. This is something we really don't even pay close attention to. I live in Bedford, and my kids have never been in that school district, and those school board members in the last 12 years have heard from me on a weekly basis. A weekly basis. You know why? Because they're taking thousands of dollars from me every single year, and they're not even educating my kids. They're going to hear from me. So, you could pull your kids out of the school system. I say you do what's best for your kids, but let those school board members know what you think. And the ones that are good, I see a couple here in the audience, the ones that get behind them and support them and get them reelected and get some good people elected.
Wonder if you'll just excuse me for a minute and allow me to make a pitch. We have a new book that we just released this past Monday in Washington, D.C. It's called Drilling Through the Core. Why Common Core is Bad for American Education. You can buy it on Amazon. We are selling it well below cost. It's about $10. I brought about 10 or so up with me, and they're gone. But I'd encourage you to take a look at it. The thing that's great about it is that it's got chapters by accomplished scholars, Dante scholars, James Madison scholars, legal experts, economists, all breaking down the various components of it on the poor academic quality, the illegality, and the costs. I just want to make a pitch for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Croc TV.